Hi everyone, Azim here. We are in chapter 17/18. We're talking about nervous system pathways. So we're still here in the nervous system. This is a big unit. We're talking about and emphasizing pathways that neurons take to send information to the brain or away from the brain if we're sensing something or if we're controlling something, respectively. We'll also be talking about the autonomic nervous system. That'll be in the next video. That's chapter 18. So since we're talking about sensory pathways, that means we need to talk about ascending pathways. We're sending information up the spinal cord to the brain. We'll also be talking about controlling things, efferent motor pathways. So that'll be from the brain down the spinal cord out a spinal nerve. We'll also, again, in the next video, compare the differences in organization between another part of the efferent nervous system, sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. It'll also be important, as always, to not only know the function of something, but what happens if we take that away. If we damage a nerve, we damage a different part of our arm, what would be the consequence? If I hit my ulnar nerve, why does it make sense that this pathway is affected? If I hurt my sciatic nerve, why does it make sense that pathway to my leg is affected? Likewise, not just the nerve for nerve damage, but also different parts of the spinal cord, since pathways involve both peripheral and central nervous system. We'll see how it all comes together here. The best analogy that I can give of this is how we sing into a karaoke microphone. So let's say you're singing into a microphone. If you're singing, that means your voice is the stimulus. Your voice is the stimulus. Your voice goes and it's picked up by that microphone. That microphone acts as a receptor. Let me simplify this. The stimulus is your voice. The microphone acts as a receptor. Microphones, let's say it's a wired microphone. Microphones are connected by cords. This cord is sending information to something. It's sending information to a system. That cord is an afferent fiber, an afferent signal, sending information to a centralized place. There might be other things going on. Let's say in a rock band, you've got a guitar, there's a wire for that. You've got drums picking up sound, there's a guitar, there's a wire for that. So there's lots of wires. When you have lots of wires bundled together, remember the term for that? That's a nerve. Just like a bunch of axons are bundled together, here we have a bunch of wires bundled together. Let's say this goes into a huge system, so there's tons of cords going through. This would all be part of the spinal cord. This would be an ascending pathway, ascending tract within the spinal cord. We deliver that information finally to the brain. That brain is the computer processor in this example. That's our integrating system. Our computer, the brain, is an integrating system. So in my silly analogy, you've sung into this microphone, that information has gone up to the computer. What does the computer do now? What we want is our voice to be amplified. That's the output. So we have to go from information sent to the computer and then our voice to be amplified. So we're going to have information descent. We're going to have a descending tract. Then we send information out through more wires, specifically an efferent nerve, singling out our efferent pathway. And the thing that we're controlling is the effector. And in this case, the effector is our speakers. We want the speakers to make our voices louder, amplify them. This basic pathway is similar to how our nervous system works. If we touch something, let's say I touch something, it's too reflexive. That's something that would actually get processed in your brain. let's say I touch something that feels yucky, something gooey, something I didn't want to touch. I touch it, that information gets sent to my brain and I process that. Oh, that's a weird feeling. I don't like that feeling. So then I send a signal down from my brain to the muscles to remove my hand from that thing. That is a type of pathway that we're seeing here. So we're going to relate these, well, everything that we've learned so far, we're going to relate neurons and neuron shapes, neuron locations to pathways. We've actually already seen a bunch of pathways when we did cranial nerves. Now we're going to include spinal nerves. As I've mentioned, an ascending tract is sensory. Oh, they're colored it right here. Let me change colors. An ascending tract is sensory. It's going up to the brain. It comes from afferent fibers. So let's say you sense something, you have information being sent along this neuron into the spinal cord, then from the spinal cord up to the brain. So you've got an afferent signal. We're delivering information from the peripheral nervous system to the central nervous system, up to the brain. If we want to control our body, if we want to move something, for instance, we need a descending tract. From our brain, we have a signal going down the spinal cord and then out the spinal cord on this efferent path to control a specific muscle. Ascending tract, axons that go up, they're sensory. Descending tract, these are motor efferent axons going down from the brain to control something. Like when you have those wires, or like when you have a highway, you don't want these lanes to be mixed up. That'll get very confusing. And neurons only send signals in one direction. So to ensure that there's organization, we have tracts that are arranged by different characteristics. They're arranged by body region. The term for arrangement by body region is somatotopic arrangement. Somatotopic. Take a look down here at this cross section of the spinal cord. If you take a look at this region that I'm coloring here in green, this region that I'm colored in green, it's all carrying, well, we'll talk about that later, but you can see different divisions here. One part of it is lower limb, one part of it is from the hip, one part of it is from the trunk, one part of it is from the upper limb. There are axons within those regions that are carrying information from different places. Let's say they're all sensory and they're all going up to the brain. They're all sensory, they're all going up to the brain, but they're coming from different regions and they're arranged differently based on region. So tracts can be grouped by body region. What you'll notice is that there's a general medial lateral rule. Your lower limb and your hip, which is for your lower body, they're more medial. They're more medial here in the spinal cord. Areas of your lower body, the axons are generally located more medially in the spinal cord, while if you're more lateral, it's for the upper body. Medial tracts for the lower body, lateral tracts for the upper body. What you'll also notice, let me erase this, is that there's a separation not only by body region, but also by what you're sensing, by modality, sensory modality. Let's say, well, it's labeled here on the far left of the spinal cord. In one region, this part, this posterior white column of the spinal cord is carrying stuff for touch pressure, proprioception, vibration, while in this small lateral portion, it's carrying pain and temperature, while in this small anterior portion, I can't remember what I said originally, but this is the anterior side. In this anterior side, it's carrying information about crude touch. So different parts of the spinal cord, different tracts of the spinal cord are carrying different senses, different modalities. When we look at ascending somatosensory tracts, there's generally 3 neurons. Anything neck down, cranial nerves are different. There's often 2 because it's not going as far. But from the neck down, if it involves a spinal nerve and we're sensing something for somatosensation, there's generally 3 neurons. And the terms we give for these neurons are first order, second order, and third order neurons. Let me draw something over here. Let's say we have a hand. Ooh, it's a Simpsons hand, 4 fingers. Okay, here's our hand. We sense something from our hand. See how I've drawn dendrites? I'm drawing a pseudo-unipolar neuron. Cell body off to the side in the dorsal root ganglion. Comes in through the dorsal root, and its axon ascends up one of the columns. In this example, it's ascending up the posterior white column. And then it ends here in the brainstem, specifically in the medulla oblongata. That would be a first order neuron. Let's draw the second neuron in this pathway. I'm going to draw this in black. The second order neuron starts here in the medulla oblongata. It's going to be multipolar because it's in the medulla, it's in the central nervous system. It's going to do something weird. We're on the right side of the body right now. We're going to cross over to the left side. See how it's crossing over? And then it ends here in the thalamus. Here's my axon terminal here in the thalamus. The term for when the axons of a neuron cross over from one side to the other, that is called decussation. Decussation. There's 2 places where decussation usually happens. Well, 3 if we include other places in the brain, like the optic chiasm, that would be for vision. And then for other commissural things that we haven't really discussed, but the corpus callosum and the anterior commissure, those allow for crossing over. But for these pathways that involve the spinal cord tracts, it can decussate here in the medulla oblongata. Specifically, it can happen in the medullary pyramids. So that's what's shown here. Or if it happens at the level of the spinal cord, which I'll show you another example coming up, it could happen in that anterior white commissure. That would be down here, but we don't see that here, so I'm going to erase this. So we get decussation. If you feel something with your right hand, it's going to get processed in your left brain. Our third order neuron, which I'm going to draw in dark blue. Our third order neuron happens to start in the thalamus. This is pretty much true for all somatosensory pathways. Multipolar, because it's in the brain. Its axon extends to the primary somatosensory cortex in the postcentral gyrus of the parietal lobe, and that's where it gets processed. If you take a look here in this primary somatosensory cortex, you'll notice something funny, that there's a mapping of a human here. You've got genitalia, you've got feet and legs and torso and arm and hand, which is why I put the axon terminal there at the hand, and the face and tongue. Why is there a mapping on the brain here? It's because this is where neurons go to if we want to sense for a specific body region. The area that I've made this axon terminal extend to, is extending to the area of our body, area of our brain that processes information about our hand. And you'll notice that the hand proportionately is way bigger than other regions that are actually in real life much bigger. Like our chest should be, you'd think is going to be really big in the brain, but it's not, while the hand is very big. What this tells us is that the hand is more sensitive. There are more neurons leading to the brain from the hand than there are from the chest. The term for all of this mapping, this is a sensory homunculus. The word homunculus means little human, and sensory because it's a little human that we form from our sensory processing. We have this human-shaped sensory map in our primary somatosensory cortex that directly relates to how sensitive an area is. Larger areas, more sensitivity. So there's a lot going on here. 3 different neurons, different shapes in some cases. That first order neuron is pseudo-unipolar because it's for somatosensation, while the other 2, because they're interneurons, are multipolar. We've got decussation that happens in this particular case in the medullary pyramids. In some pathways, it can happen in the anterior white commissure. You'll just need to take a look at the pathways that I give you. Your text is going to go over pathways with names that we're not going to discuss. I'm going to provide you pathways and have you identify different parts of them. This axon within the spinal cord happens to be going up the posterior white column. It might be going in the lateral white column. It might be going in the anterior white column. We get processing in the medulla oblongata in this case, or I should say the dorsal ganglion first, then in the medulla oblongata, then in the thalamus, finally in the primary somatosensory cortex. So we have lots of different locations. And when you feel something with your right hand, it gets processed in your left brain, and vice versa. If you feel something with your left, processed in your right brain. This was just one example of a pathway. There's many others. Again, I'm not going to have you memorize all the different names of them or all the different types. In the next activity, you'll be able to practice examples that I give you. And it'll be important to identify based on the drawing that I give you, where are the dendrites, where are the cell bodies, where are the axons, is it sensory or is it motor? For sensory tracts, somatosensory tracts, we saw 3 neurons, first order, second order, third order. When we're controlling something, when it's motor efferent, we tend to see only 2 neurons, an upper motor neuron and a lower motor neuron. There does tend to be decussation, so let's take a look at an example. We're starting here with our upper motor neuron. We're going from the brain down. We're starting here in the primary motor cortex. And once again, you'll see a funny shaped human mapped out here. You don't actually have that map on your brain. It's just our mapping so we know where these different areas come from. But here we're starting not in the primary somatosensory cortex, we're starting in the primary motor cortex of the precentral gyrus of the frontal lobe. And we do have that similar mapping. We have a motor homunculus. Areas that are larger, like the hand, that means that there are more muscles to control. You have fine-tuned movement, fine-tuned control. Your hand is smaller than your leg, than say your thigh. Take a look at your femoral region over here. Your femoral region takes up a small part of your brain, but the muscles in your femoral region are really big. But why is it so small in your primary motor cortex? Remember motor units? You can have fewer neurons coming from the brain initially, then from the spinal cord, fewer neurons leading to these muscles. So one neuron can branch and control like 1,000 or so fibers. That way you control them all at once. So there's way more divergence for these larger muscles, like the muscles of the quadriceps, and less divergence for fine-tuned motor control muscles, like the ones in your hand. All right. So we have, once again, our upper motor neuron. Let me draw this in green. Upper motor neuron, let's say we're controlling muscle of the hand. It's going to be multipolar in the primary motor cortex. It's going to descend. I'm going to draw it along this pathway. It's going to descend in this anterior white column. And let's have this one actually decussate, not in the medulla. Let's have it decussate at the anterior white commissure. Let me point to that decussation. We have decussation here in the anterior white commissure. And then I'm going to draw an axon terminal in the ventral horn, because remember, the ventral horn is for somatic motor neurons. It's for the second order somatic motor neuron. I'm going to draw another neuron here in the ventral horn. Its axon is going to exit out the ventral root, and it's going to target whatever muscle of our hand. Let me draw a hand. And muscle within the hand. There's muscle. Once again, let's recap. There's a lot going on here. We're starting in the primary motor cortex. It's an interneuron, the one in green. Our upper motor neuron is an interneuron. It's very long, starts in primary motor cortex, descends down the brainstem, down the spinal cord in the anterior white column. It decussates at the anterior white commissure. It ends in the ventral horn on the opposite side. So it started on the left side, it's ending on the right side. Our lower motor neuron starts in the ventral horn, multipolar because it's in the spinal cord. It's a motor neuron, somatic motor neuron. Its axon exits out the ventral root, forms part of the spinal nerve, and controls the muscle of the hand. Those are two examples, one of sensory, one of motor. We're going to go over more examples in class. One thing that you can do, if you look in the supplemental section of these slides, I provide those very specific names of tracts and the tracts drawn here. Again, I'm not going to test you on the names of these tracts or have you memorize every single one, but being able to read what's going on will be important. So let me just pick one over here. The text is all messed up on the left. Don't worry about that. But what we can see, this is a motor pathway. Here's our first neuron. Upper motor neuron would be in the motor cortex. It descends. It happens to decussate here in the spinal cord. In the anterior white commissure, that's one neuron. And then our next neuron starts in the ventral horn and exits out the ventral root and synapses with whatever muscle we're controlling. That's one example. Let me show you a sensory one. Oh, here, sorry, let me show you one more motor. Here's another motor one where decussation instead happens in the medullary pyramid. We're going in this lateral white column. We still end in the ventral horn. Next neuron goes to our muscle. Those are two motor examples. Or how about this sensory example? Since this is sensation, we're going to feel something somewhere from the right side of our body. So I'm going to draw dendrites, axon terminal. The axon terminal is ending in the dorsal horn. So this is new. Our second neuron, the second order neuron, from the dorsal horn, decussates in that anterior white commissure, ascends the lateral white column, ends in the thalamus. And then our third order neuron from the thalamus to the primary somatosensory cortex. Right, so ways to practice, and I'll give you an activity where you can practice this further, and you can attempt it as many times as you want without any penalty. So yeah, I understand that this is a confusing topic. I hope the activity helps you along with it. Not only understanding where you can find all these different neurons and which parts, but also why would you use a specific pathway? What could it be used for based on it? If I gave you a specific receptor, like is this receptor here a nociceptor? Is it a thermoreceptor? Is it a Meissner's corpuscle? Is it a Pacinian corpuscle? If it was any one of those things, what would you be sensing? Or if I have a specific muscle over here, let's say it's a biceps brachii, if you activate that muscle, what action would you cause? If you activate the rectus abdominis, what action would that cause? Think about the outcomes of activating these different pathways. All right, thank you everyone. We'll be going over chapter 18 in the next video, looking at the autonomic nervous system, more nervous system pathways. So I'll see you there. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.